Chess greetings to you all and welcome to Chess Collab. Alfred is my name. Today, we're just going to focus on the bishop, as last time we've covered how the rook moves. So let's just dive into today's conversation right away. Right, I'm just going to show you the chessboard, as you can see here, where I have placed the circles. That's where the bishop can go to, but it can go beyond. Can go to the last square, which I did not indicate with the circle. Right, so in other words, this is the direction of how the bishop moves. There again, that's the direction of how the bishop moves. There again, that's where the bishop can go to, also there. But so how best can we describe these lines? In other words, a bishop moves diagonally. It can go northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. That's how we can describe how it moves. And also remember, it can move backwards, forwards, as many squares as it likes. And also, as long as the track is clear, just take note of that. But besides this, we have got two bishops. The other one will be on a light square, the other one will be on a dark square. So each piece have to maintain its color until the end of the game. Above that, it should stay within those squares, those diagonals. What do I mean? If it's on a dark square, as I've already indicated, it's supposed to stay on the dark squares. If it's on the light square, it's supposed to remain there until the end of the game. But remember, the dark squares represents black, light square represents white. Right, let's move on. Now, how does the bishop captures? It captures the way it moves. So as it moves diagonally, it captures diagonally. So in other words, in this case, it captures there, direct from the bishop. But in this case, this is of the same color. So we cannot describe this one as a capture. In other words, this is, it becomes an obstruction within that square. So in other words, it will not be able to move beyond that square. And remember, it cannot jump. Right. So let's move on. Where I have drawn a line, in this case, G2, it cannot move to G2. Right, it can also not move H1, simply because there's an obstruction by its own piece, by its own pawn, in other words. Right, if there's an enemy piece on its way, that's when it can capture. I'm going to show you in the next illustration. Right, in this case, it can go further to H8. And this is regarded as one move. Right there, it can go to A3. There, it can also go to B. It can also go to C, C1. So in other words, that's how the bishop moves. Just remember and take note, it moves diagonally. So I'm going to give you a scenario where it can also capture. Right, in this case, H6 and G5. Please take note of those squares. In this case, where I've placed the circles, that's where the bishop can go to. In other words, in the event it does not want to go further, it can just remain within where those circles are. In other words, it can wait on E7, it can also wait on D7, and so on, where I am just pointing so that you'll be able to see what exactly I'm talking about. So let's move on. Right, as you can see, the line I've just drawn here, this shows where it can go to. And also it can show the furthest square which it can go to is A3 in this case. Right, in this case, furthest it can go to H6. On H6, that's where it can capture. So in other words, remember in chess, whenever we capture, we are taking off this pawn, which I am pointing at, and replace on the same square with the bishop, which is the white bishop, which is there. Right. So that's how we capture in chess. Please remember that all the time. Right. Then on the next chessboard, you can see the bishop can capture. If there is anything on the way, if there was something on B2, it would have captured that. If it was something on A3, it would have captured, but it will only choose one item to capture. Right. Then we also have that squares I've already explained. Also have a rook on G5. The bishop can capture the rook on G5. So it is supposed to choose only one move. And remember, it cannot go on H6. Simply because, remember, the bishop cannot jump. It only moves. If there is nothing on its path, it can move and choose any square of any choice. But as long as there is nothing on the way and it's a diagonal. Take note of the movement of the bishop. In this case, you can go on D2, you can go on D, E3, you can go on F4. That's all I wanted to cover with you for today's lesson. Please just remember just to subscribe so that whenever I upload the next lesson, you will be able to just have a look and you can receive the notification. And of course, in the next lesson, we are going to look at the queen. Thank you so much for joining.